A former member of the 9/11 Commission says that the Commission report that they produced way back in 2004 didn't make clear the extent of all of the evidence that they had at that point that members of the Saudi government had been involved, linked in some fashion with the 9/11 hijackers, or at least some of those hijackers. It's John Lehman, former Republican of the 9/11 Commission, said there was an awful lot of participation by Saudi individuals in supporting the hijackers, and some of those people worked in the Saudi government. The commission may have made a mistake by not stating that explicitly in its final report. He said our report should never have been read as an exoneration of Saudi Arabia. I don't know that exoneration is necessarily the word I would use for it. It does say that there are issues with Saudi Arabia, but it certainly doesn't go as far as he and one other anonymous member of the commission is saying that they should have based on the information that they had. Now, recently, the 9/11 Commission chairman, former Republican Governor Tom Keene of New Jersey, praised Saudi Arabia as overall an ally of the United States in combating terrorism, and said the commission's investigation, which came after the congressional report was written, had identified only one Saudi government official, a former diplomat in the Saudi consulate in LA named Fahad al-Thumari, as being implicated in the 9/11 plot investigation, which might seem as if, well, we looked and there was only one guy who was sort of involved in some fashion, but Lehman said that Keene and Hamilton's statement was a game of semantics and that the commission had been aware of at least 5 Saudi government officials who were strongly suspected of involvement in the terrorist support network, some of them in California, in fact. And he said they may not have been indicted, but they were certainly implicated. There was an awful lot of circumstantial evidence. But, however, he does say that he doesn't believe that the Saudi royal family or the country's senior civilian leadership had any role in supporting al-Qaeda or the 9/11 plot. Simply that there was more involvement on the part of some members of the government than had previously been revealed or admitted.
Okay, so these commissions, this is why people get skeptical and cynical, right? So on the commission on who shot JFK, you had Alan Dulles, who might have been one of the people who was most heavily implicated in being involved.
Right.
Oops, right.
Well, then wouldn't he be an expert?
It's true.
Well, I suppose he would.
Really
right?
valuable perspective.
Yes.
Witness, firsthand witness.
And Dulles used to run the CIA. He got fired by JFK, hated JFK, curious guy to put on a commission to find out who killed JFK, even if you don't believe any of the other stuff, right? So now here in this commission, we had 28 pages talking to us about how involved Saudi Arabia was. So that's the 28 pages they left out. Okay, and then instead, though, that's why I think even Lehman doesn't go far enough. Kane comes out and says, oh, yeah, Saudi Arabia's been an ally in the fight for terrorism. But that's not what the 28 pages said. That's why you redacted it. So it's...
No, Staples was really busy that day when they were like making the photocopies, so that's what happened.
But also to say that they're an ally in the war on terrorism is to look very, very narrowly at specifically the tactical assistance that they give us in counterterrorism, right? This, like the intelligence stuff, and to ignore the fact that the entire philosophy of the kingdom is founded on spreading radical jihadist ideology around the world through the madrasas that they fund in places as far away as Indonesia. I used to go to, as an Australian, I used to go to Indonesia as a kid for vacations. You would never hear Arabic being spoken. Now you do. Now you do hear Arabic being spoken. I mean, the Saudis are the most noxious possible. The Saudis are to the war on terrorism what the USSR was to the Cold War. I mean, they are the source of all of the ideological problems, and they fund all of this, and then they turn around and say, but we let you know that there was this nasty guy who was sneaking into the country and who you should arrest. Well, thanks a lot for your assistance in the war on terror.
Well, I like the idea that it's only one guy from the government. So hashtag NBD, no big deal, right? Like they have nothing to do with this.
Yeah, well, it's a good thing we flew them out right away.
Right, before we could find out.
Yeah. So isn't that amazing? I mean, imagine if Obama had gone out of his way to protect the people who were at least implicated, and some of which who we admit were implicated in the worst terrorist attack against this country. What do you think the Republicans would have done with that? Like, oh, you flew out the guys who were implicated in killing 3,000 Americans on U.S. soil and taking down the World Trade Center. What in the world, right? I mean, forget flying out. If he hadn't immediately caught them and tortured them, right, there would have been a scandal on top of scandal.
More proof he's Muslim.
Right.
What they would have needed.
But to be fair, guys, everybody's buzzing now about how Bush might be Muslim. So it's probably fair as fair.
Weird links. And it is weird that even at the time, I mean, this we've known of that for a long time. I mean, famously in Fahrenheit 9/11 and all of that. but it never even stuck to Bush at the time.
Right.
It was odd that he was able to basically run for re-election on the strength with which he prosecutes the war on terror and how he's the one who's willing to stand up. Although now, actually, by comparison to the politicians we have today on the Republican side, he seems like the friendliest person towards Islam in the world, basically, since he doesn't think that every one of them should be killed or banned from the country. But the fact that it never stuck to him is so odd, the cognitive dissonance that those on the right were able to sustain for years.
Don't you think that that's because at the time we really had no idea what was going on and nobody had a clue? I mean, the average American's understanding of the Middle East, of Islam, and of the Arab world may be bad now. But in the year 2001, we didn't know what the fuck was going on. Like, nobody had a clue. So the idea of him being a hypocrite, for example, for supporting the Saudis and for being buddies with the Saudis, the average American voter was just like, well, he's the president. I'm sure he knows what he's doing, right?
Yeah.
But now the idea that there isn't more pushback against our alliance with Saudi Arabia, now that we're still allowed to portray Iran as being the really bad guys, but the Saudis as being the ones who are helping us with the war on terrorism, that's what's shameful. It's been 15 years. We should know better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, didn't Fahrenheit 9/11 come out before the election?
Before 2004?
2004?
That's my memory, but it's been a long time.
So, and obviously there's
I think it was actually rushed out so that it could be out before.
Right, that's my recollection as well. And so, look, Josh, you're right in that now there's finally a little bit of buzz about like, hey, maybe partnering up with the Saudis, not a brilliant idea, right? And back then there was almost none of that. But at the same time, this goes to the pathetic nature of the Democratic Party. If I'm running as George W. Bush and 15 out of the 19 hijackers are Saudis, and he accidentally invaded Iraq, okay, and by the way, that's your best case scenario, that it was an accident, right? And now we find out right before the election that he flew out the Saudis. I would have pounded him on that over and over and over again. The guy helped him. He helped him. And how can you say, I mean, it took so long, and it took Donald Trump to finally say, what do you mean you did a great job protecting us after 9/11? The worst terrorist attack in U.S. history happened on your watch. And then they said, you remember the whole thing, the 9 months, that's not fair. It's not really, is that really his presidency? 9 minutes into Obama's presidency, they were blaming him for the deficit Bush left him behind.
They'd already started a Tea Party.
Right. And it's not like Condi didn't get the daily presidential briefings, right? About, what was it? Something vague about Osama bin Laden to attack the United States.
Inside the United States.
Yeah. In the United States,
I believe the word was determined to attack inside the United States.
No smoking gun. I mean, there's open to interpretation.
Let's not give too much credit to Donald Trump on it. Like, he brought it up, but he also tries to present himself as having been strong in that way back in the day.
Right.
And he was not.
No, that's
so
true.
we can't give him a lot of credit for that.
Okay, so...
I do love the part, though, can I cite something? I love when this article says, other commission members have called for these documents, which have been reviewed by some lawmakers, to be released, even if doing so damaged the commission's legacy, the newspaper reported. So this is pretty impressive. They're actually saying, like, even if it has the truth in it, we should do it. Like, this is so embarrassing. This is so embarrassing. I know we're taking it for granted, but they're basically saying, like, even if it's uncomfortable because it'll make it look like we were lying, maybe we should still let the truth out. Like, that's the point of releasing this.
Yeah.
To make them look, to destroy, like, their legacy will be damaged precisely because they're not releasing these things, right?
Yes.
Well,
like, that's the price you pay when you're covering something up. Your legacy is damaged when it's released.
Right, and all the papers that are covering this, et cetera, you're right, Katie, they treat that as like, oh, wow, good on them,
Yeah, exactly.
right? Instead of like, wow, we've sunk to such a low that when someone says like, hey, maybe we should reveal the truth because we work in the government, like,
That's
people
so
are like,
principled.
wow, pat on the back.
Yeah.
Okay. But
USA.
right. Shouldn't that kind of, like, in a democracy be what you're supposed to do all the time?
Well, this comes
The
also
default.
just to the massive overclassification of everything in the government. We've gotten to a stage where even when we talk about Hillary's emails and stuff, dumb move, she shouldn't have done it, but I don't think there's any there. Nonetheless, just why is everything in government is at least secret, if not top secret, if not a higher level of classification? This stuff doesn't need to be secret. We all know the Saudis were involved in some way. Just show us exactly how, and heaven forbid we might offend their feelings.
Yeah.
I suspect that it's just a natural consequence of, as you accumulate more and more power in the government generally and the executive specifically, I think that wanting to keep control over information is just a part of that.
Yeah.
And I bet you can trace it in other regimes as well.
Oh, totally.
But it is amazing the extent to which the Obama administration has worked from day one and continues to work to protect the reputation of the Bush administration. Can you imagine a Republican administration like being willing to be damaged PR-wise now? Because a lot of people are criticizing Obama not being more forthcoming and being willing to say we should now at least release those documents. No Republican would ever do that for Obama.
I'm not sure that he's doing it for Bush, though, right?
It would
that
hurt
is
him
a
too, to some
byproduct
extent.
of his. He runs quite a paranoid administration. They are quite a closed administration. They are not an open administration. It's intrinsic to his view of the world that a strong executive should have a bunch of secrets, and I think that that's consistent between the Bush administration and the Obama administration.
So which then
beautiful.
which then gets to my point about Lehman. Wait a minute, he just leaked enormously classified information according to this administration and the previous administration. I assume they're going to throw him in jail, right?
Right.
He's on his way to Russia, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh no, that's right. He's powerful.
Right.
So he's not going to get any consequence, even though he brazenly did it. Now, I'm on his side. I want the information to be out, but let's just note the hypocrisy.
Right. Just pretend to be consistent. That's all right. We all know that you're not.
Yeah.
But
If you've got a whistleblower that the government doesn't have power, reveals information they don't want, well, he's going to be chased to the end of the earth, right?
Yeah.
But if it's a powerful guy who was on the 9/11 Commission, yeah, I leaked it. What are you going to do about it? You're not going to do a goddamn thing about it, right? And finally, to Josh's earlier point, the guys who were most implicated were the Saudi Ministry of Islamic Affairs. Yeah, like no shit, Sherlock. These are the guys that are spreading the poison of Wahhabism throughout the whole world. And it's not like it would be surprising if they didn't help Al-Qaeda.
Yeah.
Right? It's the guys who are saying,
they'd be
jihad,
messing
jihad, jihad. Let's go
Put your
get
money
them."
where your mouth is.
they'd be asleep at the wheel.
Right.
So
Like, exactly. Like, if they didn't fund Al-Qaeda, they'd be mortified. Like,
Right.
oh, my God.
worst job ever. Fired. You're so fired.
Right.